Thanks for the brief intro, Andrew. That's much appreciated. As Andrew sort of said, his kind of brief to me was really based around, I think, a need that he recognises amongst the kind of non-profit community for a little bit of support with social media. The approach I've taken in the presentation, and I'll kind of invite questions along the way, and by all means kind of chip in if you have any as we go through it. Rather than focus on the very technical side of social media, how to compose a Facebook post, how to do a tweet, that kind of thing, I've taken a little bit more of a strategic view of it, because I'm hoping that what this will do is help you all get to what you might call a bit of a social media strategy and methodology, which should help then producing content become much easier. I think, don't know if this is true to say of everyone here, but one of the things we hear quite a lot from our clients is that they know they need to be doing social media, or they feel that they need to be doing social media. It's not actually right for everybody. But they don't know where to start with it. They don't know how to start to think about content, what's relevant, how to avoid the kind of noise that you get on social media, motivational Monday posts, smiley cat pictures, that kind of thing. So, and just to kind of tail off the presentation, just including some tips there to kind of help make life a bit easier from a technical standpoint without going into too much detail. Very briefly, Andrew, you did gave us a little intro there, just so you guys, some of whom I think do know us already, but who don't know us, we call ourselves a brand and demand agency at Thrive. Essentially, we're a marketing and advertising agency. So we help clients get their message out there in the simplest sense and create demand for their brand, ultimately to elevate it. We do work a lot in the third sector too, and I happen to be a trustee of a charity myself, so I kind of understand some of the pressures within the third sector. Well, our focus is always on great work that works. That's a kind of little mantra that we have here. Essentially, we kind of judge ourselves by how effective the work is for our clients. Some of the services that we have in-house, everything you expect from an integrated agency, really, everything from brand identity through to social media, which is what we're going to cover today, clearly. Thing I always like to do when we're kind of, getting into the world of our audience, and in this case, you're our audience really for this presentation, is just to kind of put a little bit of context to things. And interestingly, I started to look around to see what impact lockdown had and pandemic had had on the charity sector. This statement from Daniel, I'm not going to try and even pronounce his surname there, was very interesting for me, because working as a trustee, this is very true of the charity that I'm a trustee for. Actually, funding for us has not been an issue, but actually getting out there and delivering the service that we're meant to be delivering has been really, really challenging, and demand for it has increased. And I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but that seems to be something that lots of people have experienced, lots of charities have experienced during the pandemic. Couple of other observations. Despite the challenges of the last 18 months, I'm kind of rounding it off for ease there. CAF say that 57% of charities in the UK still feel very optimistic, which is good, I think. More than half say that they recognise they need to shift more emphasis to online fundraising. I think that's probably something that was happening anyway, but actually has been, the pandemic may have been the catalyst for some people, perhaps, in kind of recognising that. Again, just experience in our world, we've seen, very broad term this, but we've seen digital transformation, people moving more online, people kind of processing more data online, just accelerate years in months. And the third sector is really going to keep up with that. And then, encouragingly, 2 in 5 charities said they felt that donors would be more open to donating online. And there are lots of stats actually that support that claim. People are kind of quite willing to kind of get involved with either online fundraising activity or donations online. That said, only 36% of people undertake online fundraising at the moment. And another statement from CAF, which is that whilst sweeping generalisation, charities have embraced digital during the crisis, fewer than 1 in 5 say they feel that their organisation knows how to effectively fundraise online. Actually, this was an article on their website that goes on to talk about exactly what we're going to cover today, that many feel that they don't know where to start when it comes to specifically content creation, perhaps, or things that are meaningful for their audience and the people that they want to get on board and engage with their charities. So I don't know whether those kind of observations are things that you guys would potentially recognise in your own organisations, but it'd be interesting to hear if that's the case. So where to start? I think going back to that earlier statement, lots of people do get a sense that they ought to be doing social media in the world of business, not just necessarily in the world of the third sector. But they struggle. And one of the reasons I think they struggle, and one of the reasons we experience they struggle here at Thrive, is because they come at it a little bit the wrong way. So they'll come at it from the point of view of creating a post and trying to do that on a regular basis. And if you're not careful, you can just fall into the trap of pushing out noise that doesn't really have much impact, doesn't gain much traction. Occasionally, people get lucky. Andrew and I were talking just before the call, actually, and there are lots of cases where people have been successful with that approach, a bit by fluke. What is very true to say is if you start with content, social media and social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook become a way of amplifying that content. And if you think of the content you create as the ultimate destination point for the people that you're trying to talk to, you'll also find that it becomes a bit more engaging and it provides a really good kind of anchor point for the stuff that you push out. And just as the slide says, that could be something as simple as a blog, a video, which doesn't need to be a well-polished, produced piece of work. The video can be taken on a phone. It could be an interview with a member of your team, something like that. Fundraising and sponsorship packs, which I'm sure you'll all have, or initiatives even, not necessarily the full hit. And then event details, things that are going on in your world. Just having something clear to send people to gives you a really good excuse to then start amplifying that content across social media, which makes thinking about what you're going to push out across social media a lot easier. So there's a couple of tips to help you get started there. Well, first question, does that make sense? Do you know what I'm getting at when I'm talking about that kind of content?
I think it makes sense to me. I mean, it definitely does, especially around starting from a content-focused approach first.
Yeah.
Rather than, okay, I need to make a social media post and then get it out there, and then to focus on what that content is first.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. I'll come on to something in a second as well, which will help guide that content. And that's kind of point one on this slide, really, which is starting with understanding your audience. Because again, it's something that's very natural to us in the world of advertising, perhaps, but doesn't necessarily come naturally to everyone out in the wider world. And then the second point that we'll cover is just defining some content pillars, which will hopefully kind of help guide you in terms of building consistency in the messaging that you're pushing out. So if we start with the kind of audience bit.
Sorry, Rachel, you had a question?
Yeah, just very briefly. You talked about the destination point rather than starting with a post. So could you just define that destination point?
Yeah, so as I said, Rachel, really what I mean by that is where you want to send people to as a result of putting that post out there. So that could be, a blog piece or a piece of content on your website, for example. In fact, more often than not, it probably will be. Or it might be to go and download something. But this little kind of next section will cover an example of the kind of content or destination point that I'm talking about there. If you do that, what you tend to find, Rachel, is that you can track better what's working well for you in terms of the kind of content that you're pushing out there. But rather than just a post that appears in people's feed and doesn't really ask them to do anything, or may just kind of push a piece of communication at them, there's something tangible they can do as a result of seeing it. Something they can go and read, something they can go and download, something they can go and watch, for example. Does that make sense?
She does, yeah. She's on mute.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I've had to minimise. I've had to minimise. I've had to minimise faces. Apologies. So
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
No, good.
So does that follow? Can you hear me? So
Yes.
does that follow that if you're asking them to do something, click on your website, then that increases the traffic for your post to go further? Is that how it works?
There's an element of that around it. Certainly, there's yes. So clearly, there's a slight added benefit there that you're creating more traffic to your website, and they might get awareness of other things that's going on, not just the destination point that you're sending them to. Yeah, absolutely. More importantly, over the course of time, it will. This is probably a separate topic, but I'm guessing that most of you will have access to some kind of website analytics that will report on how people are interacting with your website. So you'll start to get a feel then for what kind of content is working best for you from an engagement level. And it's interesting, it won't cover too much of this as we go through this presentation, but it's not a mistake as such, but lots of people kind of judge the success of the social content they put out by the likes and shares that content might get. And that's a very superficial way of measuring the level of engagement. But you tend to find, and brands tend to find, that most likes and shares that they get across social media come from people who are already brand advocates, people who support you or know you already. And actually what you really want to get people engaged with is the content. And again, that's kind of down to making sure that content is relevant to the people that you're trying to talk to, you're trying to engage with, really. But yes, you're absolutely right. It does, of course, create extra footfall, if you like, to the website, which is another added bonus.
Thank you.
So just in terms of audiences, this is a simple trick that we use in our business for our clients a lot, and I think could apply very well to most of you guys. Whenever we're doing a piece of work, the first thing we have to get to understand is our clients' audiences, and you guys will have a good understanding of that yourselves, I'm sure. Simple stuff, who they are, where they are, and what it is that we understand about them that will mean they take notice of us. So what do we need to tell them, basically? It helps identify their interests and motivators, the most appropriate channels to reach them, because that's an important consideration when you're thinking about content in the broadest sense, but particularly social media as well. Don't waste your time putting your effort into LinkedIn if actually we know that our audience are all hanging out on Facebook. So that's a good thing to know, and generally not too tricky to find out, to be fair, when you've kind of gone through the audience matrix, but I'll come on to in a second. And importantly, and again, I'm probably the biggest advocate for this, because it is our world here at Thrive. But you've got to get the message right. Get it wrong, it can be potentially damaging, but get it right, it can be really, really effective. That's the real trick with social media, because there is genuinely so much noise out there. People see just hundreds of social media posts every day, potentially. How do you make yours cut through? What is it that you're going to say that's going to make it memorable to people, or to get them to click, if that's indeed what we want them to do? So we have a little simple trick, which I've got a template document that I'm going to share with you. I've sent it to Andrew just ahead of the presentation this morning, so hopefully he can make that available to everybody somehow. We have a simple spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet, there are columns for the things that are bulleted on this slide. So who's the audience? What do we want to tell them? Why should they believe us, which is really important? And then what do we want them to do? So there's a clear ask. So that's the thing that often gets missed with social media. I'm doing this. Why am I doing it? And what is it I want people to do as a result of actually seeing what I'm putting out there? And that'll all help guide the content that you produce. Because with an understanding of your audience, you can produce content that is compelling to them. Then we'll get them to sit up and take notice. When I talk about audiences, just to expand on that a little bit, it'll be different, I'm sure, for every one of you. But you might find there's some commonality. So, for example, you know, funding bodies or potential commissioners you might identify as one audience. What you say to them could and probably will be very different to what you might say to a member of the public who you think has got a leaning towards your charity and potentially will support it. So that's why it's good to define the audience matrix, so that when you're producing content, you've got those people in mind. And I'll give you, because I'm conscious that is a little kind of so what I'm looking for, a little ambiguous. I'll give you a real world example. So I'm struggling at the moment to attend the meetings, but the charity I'm a trustee of, Friends for Leisure, a couple of years ago ran a business engagement scheme, actually. The reason we did this is because, like many small charities, unrestricted funding is something that we struggle with massively, because most of the work that we do is delivered as a result of a commission of some kind. So it will typically only fund the activity that we're there to deliver. But you've got all your back office sort of functions to cover, salaries not least of all for some of those back office staff. So we wanted to launch a campaign to businesses to see if they would get involved and help sponsor some of the activity, but in an unrestricted sense. So I guess I'll probably jump ahead slightly here. So in terms of who the audience is in this instance, it was local businesses, primarily SMEs, anywhere within Cheshire East, because that's the region that we cover as a service. What we needed to tell them was that by becoming a business buddy, you'll help reduce the loneliness of disabled children. And that appears on what you're looking at here, which is a cover of a little sponsorship pack, actually. So this was a PDF download, but it was circulated and amplified across social media. Why they should believe us, which is the next thing I'm going to kind of tell people, it's really easy, actually. And I think probably this is almost the easiest bit for probably most of you guys. You'll all have a very clear understanding of why you do what you do and the benefit of that. We delivered that to this particular business audience in the form of statistics that demonstrated the impact of our work, testimonials from people who'd come along to some of our activity groups. So we've given people a clear proposition. This is what we want you to do: support us and reduce the loneliness of disabled children. Given them all the reasons why, and then we've given them a really, really clear ask, although it is a little bit wordy, I will admit in hindsight. But we just need your help to achieve our ambitions, basically. And in this instance, we asked people to sign up to a £50 a month donation, and we're very clear in outlining what that would actually help the charity achieve and deliver. And perhaps whilst that wasn't, we didn't use the audience matrix we have in a formal sense, those guiding principles, who they are, what do we want to tell them, why should they believe us, what do we want them to do, informed all of this communication, and informs most of the communication pieces that we do day to day for clients here. And of course, with this, which again, these are all kind of screenshots from a PDF, you've got, going back to some of those earlier slides, you've got a really compelling piece of content that gives you an anchor point to start to send messages out on social media, because there's a clear destination point for people who are going to see that post. So hopefully that kind of ties that little bit of the conversation together. Again, and apologies, I can't see faces, so I can't give responses. You might all be crying by now, but hopefully that again makes sense of it all. So any questions at this point?
No, I think everyone's happy.
Okay, good. Okie dokie. Something else that is often in using the kind of audience matrix approach, understanding audiences approach to kind of creating content, that's probably very applicable for campaign level stuff. So if you've got a very clear objective and a specific goal in mind, like business sponsorship, for example, you know, it will bring clarity to what you need to produce as part of that content. There's a bit of work in it, perhaps. The second, hopefully helpful tip that I'm going to impart that will help perhaps a little bit more with the day-to-day posting on social media and doesn't necessarily rely on having those destination points, those blogs, those videos, those PDF downloads, but will help keep you visible, but being consistent with what you're putting out there from a messaging and branding perspective, shall we say. So these content pillars is a little trick that we use again with lots of our clients that help guide that just give you some guiding principles in terms of the content that you produce on a regular basis. Again, you know, you have to have your audience in mind, but you maybe don't need to go into the sort of level of detail that we just did when we were talking through the audience matrix. And I'll give you an example again of content pillars. You might everyone will have different ones, so it's impossible to list them all. And I've just kind of picked out 4 that are kind of quite common in our world. And I, you know, suggest picking only 3 or 4 as well, to be fair. As your pillars of content, what you might want to do, and some of this depends on how well known you are to a degree, is you know, celebrate the successes that you've had as an organisation. And that might be just one of your content pillars. So that again guides the content that you put out. What can we shout about? I don't know, let's go this month or this week that we've achieved, either ourselves or, you know, for the people we represent or with the people we represent. Demonstrating the good work that you do. Similarly, that probably ties back to those successes in many cases. Showcasing people is a good content pillar, and that can be, to be fair, that can be people that work in your organisation, and again celebrating the good work that they do, because that's a good way to communicate to people the benefit of what you do. And equally, it could be people who have benefited from your so it's clients, if you like, who might be willing to offer up things like testimonials and such like. And then educating the audience, again, is another good content pillar. And that really should be in almost everyone's content pillars, is my view. And that's about educating people in terms of what you do, how you do what you do, why you do what you do, your ultimate ambitions. If you start to kind of put messages out that are around that, you'll tend to find that people who that resonates with will become advocates of your organisation, like and share content, engage more with future kind of initiatives, all that sort of good stuff. And I've just dropped a couple of screen grabs in here that that kind of show some examples of that. Keep Britain tidy. Interestingly, one of our clients is Keep Wales Tidy, and they've just done the same initiative as the main Keep Britain Tidy brand. And kind of these little heroes, they're just you know, they're just celebrating the success of the campaign that they ran in this kind of social post. Friends for Leisure, you know, had to include them. Got to big them up where I can, but that's just a nice post that actually kind of is a big thank you to all the volunteers that make a difference. So those kind of pillars are just there to act as a bit of a guiding principle, if you like. So that it's a little easier to think of stuff to put out there on social media when you're planning content. Again, does that all sound clear? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. That bit of the presentation split between audience and kind of content pillars is probably more the kind of strategic element, if you like. But what you will find, if you have a good understanding of your audience groups and if you have some defined content pillars, you'll probably, I'm making an assumption here, and forgive me if this isn't the case, you may not struggle, but so many people struggle with a little bit of inertia when it comes to social media because they can't think of content or meaningful content to put out. Those 2 tips will hopefully help you kind of overcome that if you ever experience it. A bit more practically, there's a couple of other things that I've added in that hopefully will help, again, make life a little easier for you. And forgive me, because there's a good chance you guys are already all over this, but just in terms of some practical tips, and it may validate some of your own thinking. Images when posting is great. You know, that typically just grabs more attention, particularly if they're authentic images as well. So clearly, you know, you can use stock image banks and things to source potential imagery, except there's sometimes challenges in terms of permissions where you might be showing people who are beneficiaries of your service, for example. But just, you know, anything authentic is really good. Video in particular typically sees higher levels of engagement. I don't know if that's something that you may well have experienced for yourself, but that's just, you know, a little bit more standout in a practical sense if it's appearing in someone's social feed. But also tends to give you, if you have the facility to produce it, and most of us do on the mobile phone, you know, gives you the ability to get potentially fairly complex messages across in a very simple way, because what you can get across in the video is a lot easier than trying to write a really long post where there may be a character limit to try and communicate something. Hashtags obviously build greater awareness, and I think, you know, don't be afraid to create them as well, particularly around certain campaigns. So for the Business Buddies campaign for Friends for Leisure, not surprisingly, we use the hashtag Business Buddies. Always good just to put that hashtag into a quick search before you decide on what you're going to go with, to make sure that it isn't already in use or being used for something that isn't appropriate. Another tip, which again, to be fair, you'd be surprised how many people don't perhaps consider this, but for some it's very natural. Just tag people and organisations where it's relevant to do so. That could be, again, you know, people's accounts if it's a member of the team that you're talking about. It could be an organisation you've delivered something within partnership. All helps just kind of get greater exposure for your content. And there's a little sort of, yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure level you guys are all at, but there are some great tools out there that will help kind of schedule posts in advance and save you a little bit of time. There's many. I just kind of picked on Hootsuite because it's probably the best known, to be fair. But even social media platforms themselves often have their own scheduling in kind of included now. So, you know, if you're only using Twitter, you don't need Hootsuite. Twitter has its own scheduling, so you can kind of create your posts in advance. It's great if you're going on holiday and you want to look important in front of the boss. You just schedule a load of content to go out while you're away. Consistency is key. I don't want to name names here, but Vision are very lucky to have Lee because he's a very talented designer. But building a bank of graphical assets will help save you time, and it'll build consistency. Again, as people glance through social media feeds on the phones, on the laptops, desktops, you know, if yours is consistent, they'll stand out a little bit more, they'll recognise it, and again, are more likely to then take notice of it. I'll cover some examples again in a second, but, you know, using different styles for different posts can help as well. I haven't put this in as an example, and in hindsight I perhaps should have done. One of the things that we do at Friends for Leisure, we kind of developed a little brand guideline document for them a few years ago. We use colour to denote the different audience groups that we have. So there are young people, clearly. There are funders, there are volunteers, for example. I think volunteers is a kind of a magenta colour. It might be green, actually. Another one is blue. So actually we use those colours as a visual shorthand to the kind of content that we're producing. So if I see green, I know it's for me if I'm a volunteer, for example. So, you know, just little things like that can help. And then if you're not lucky enough to have a lead, then tools like Canva are great. If you haven't come across it, there's a link there, and the presentation will be available to you, I think, after we've finished. Canva just allows you to create some very simple graphical assets. You don't really need to be a designer. It's dead easy, and will just help you kind of build a little bit of consistency in terms of the content that you put out there. I'd like to ask for a show of hands, but again, I can't see anyone at the moment, but be interested to know how many of you are already onto things like that. Just in terms of that consistency, and I've used, I couldn't find in our kind of bank of clients a particularly relevant third sector sort of example. So I've just used Thrive, but we just have these very, very, very simple templates that we use for our own social posts. So if it's a text post, we just use this very simple kind of color-based template, mix up our brand colors a little bit. If it's a shout-out message like we're hiring, or we're making a big announcement, whatever, we have again a very simple post that we use. But you'll see that they all feel very consistent. You'd expect that, I guess, from someone like us. The content that we produce and amplify across social media more often than not is blog based. So articles that we upload to our website, essentially. We encourage, and this is perhaps separate, again, it's a bit of a separate topic, but it could be good for you guys to do. We encourage everybody here in the agency to contribute towards the content that we push out online. And this is the kind of template we just use when we're kind of promoting a piece of content like a blog. So you can see Lucy, who's one of our designers and one of those who wrote that blog. So it makes sense. For us, things like client feedback, but for you guys too, as you saw in the kind of business buddies brochure that we did for Friends for Leisure, it's great if you can evidence the good work that you do by getting testimonials from the people who benefited from it. If we're talking about people or what's going on in the agency, we show our people. And the other trick in it, again, this is, I guess, fairly obvious really, but good to get into the habit of kind of creating a kind of a monthly plan where you can for content. So going back to that audience matrix and the kind of content pillars, and me saying to you guys that should help guide you in terms of the content you produce, doesn't mean that you need to do that on an ad hoc basis. Probably most of the people that we work with or we manage social content for, time will be set aside in a given period. Let's go with monthly for the sake of argument. And within half a day, you can plan a calendar of activity across social media and the kind of content that might need to happen to support that, in a very short space of time, really. But again, it makes life a lot easier, particularly if you're in a position where you may need to get approval from other people within your organisation before content is pushed out, or you might want to get them to contribute as well. If you happen to be the person responsible for curating and pushing out content in your organisation, it's a great idea to sort of get help from others where you can. But with those content pillars, with the audiences in mind and with a solid plan, you can brief those people in terms of the kind of things that you want from them, and with a plan by when, so that it makes life just a little bit easier again. And that's kind of probably a little early here, but that's probably wrapped most of the presentation up. Just summarise some of the tools that I mentioned in the presentation, just in case they're useful to people. I kind of, I'd encourage you to have a bit of a look around, because there are alternatives to things like Canva and Hootsuite, and I'm happy to kind of give you some other suggestions if any of you want to kind of pick my brain. And then the audience matrix that I mentioned earlier on, we have a simple Excel file, which, as I said, I've given to Andrew, who I'm sure will make available to you guys if you think that would be useful to you.
Yeah, I'll be sending out all these resources after the.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's brilliant. Yeah, and the presentation's on a link as well, so you can access it and feel free to share it with colleagues and people as well. I'm very happy for it to be circulated. And that's it.